Sort of a strange moment at a Kamala Harris rally in Wisconsin over the weekend where two apparent UW lacrosse dudes at the rally shouted out their belief in Jesus Christ and garnered this reaction. Did you catch that? Christ is King, Jesus is Lord, and the response from Kamala was, "You must be at the wrong rally."
And then people started laughing. A bunch of heathens out there. Mm-hmm.
It's just this is the woman who just cut that video for the Al Smith dinner, talking about how she would never denigrate Catholics or Christians, and she talks about how she prays at night for this and for that, and this is part of her process and routine and so forth. So
she spent her 60th birthday at a church in Georgia saying faith is a verb. She's all over God, and then somebody yells out, "Jesus is, or Christ is King, and Jesus is the Lord, our Savior," and she says that to them, as if it was trying to be funny, like it was a punchline or something.
So it's interesting and somewhat telling. Related story, particularly Kamala and her deep faith, and her deep commitment to love and inclusion. Like providing taxpayer-funded gender reassignment surgeries for prisoners and illegal immigrants, that sort of commitment. Mm-hmm. UN report on violence against women and girls that was put together by the point person for this project, Reem Al-Salem. This report on violence against women and girls in sport, she finds that what was it, 680 at the Olympics, or no, excuse me, 890 medals were won by men who were identifying as women. In other words, 890 medals were taken away from women. She's calling for sex screening in women's sports now as a result of this. The report says, in a case where the sex of an athlete is unknown or uncertain, a dignified, swift, non-invasive, and accurate sex screening method, such as a cheek swab, or when necessary for exceptional reasons, genetic testing, should be applied to confirm the athlete's sex. It would have avoided, like, the women's boxing debacle at the Paris Games, she argues. But 72 trans-identifying male players competed in women's football in England, up from 50 when the policy review began, for other examples. I mean, she goes through all of the sort of aggregate numbers of the incursion of men into women's sports and what that has wrought. Because the way this gets reported and the way that we talk about it is the high-profile case. It's Leah Thomas, and then it's the volleyball player at San Jose State, and so on and so forth. But when you start to look at, as she said, 600 female athletes losing 890 medals in 29 different sports, it starts to be more than something that is occurring on the margins, as they would have you believe. As Kamala said in response to Trump's ad on her position in promotion of taxpayer funding of trans surgeries, generally speaking, and specifically to prisoners and illegal immigrants. I mean, it's all just very telling about the significant cultural, not that Trump is not C.S. Lewis, but the significant cultural divide between the two parties that overlays all the discussion of border security and prices at the grocery store and so forth. For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined again by Spencer Klavan. Spencer is a scholar, writer, podcaster, and author of The Light of the Mind, Light of the World, How New Science is Illuminating Ancient Truths About God. Spencer, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
What about that moment? I mean, I don't want to make too much of it, but it was just an interesting knee-jerk reaction. And sometimes knee-jerk reactions tell you a lot. You're at the wrong rally because you shout out Christ is King, Jesus is the Lord.
Yeah, I think knee-jerk is exactly what it was, and that actually to me is why it's so telling. If she had been making an argument or thinking that through, that would be one thing, but the fact that she just instantly jumps to, I got the sense she felt like these were, those evil Christian nationalists I've heard so much about, right? She just links strong, direct professions of Christian faith. In her mind, that means fascism, that means January 6th, that means insurrection, that means all the big nasties. And it's telling not just about Kamala Harris and who she is, but I actually think it stands in for a kind of assumption that has really set in very widely in our culture. I think we all kind of grew up with it, that faith, especially strong faith and proud faith, is a kind of backwards superstition. You can only be passionately religious if you've shelved your rational mind, if you just don't think through things and you act on pure instinct. And that's kind of actually what my book is about. You know, you mentioned Light of the Mind, Light of the World. It's the sort of story of how that assumption set in, how science went from a religious enterprise, the project of knowing God's universe and using our gift of reason to understand creation, and became gradually used to underwrite this totally different idea of the world, that all reality, all truth is anti-religious, and so therefore religious people are just backwards and superstitious. And I think that idea is not only really pernicious, I actually think it's really outdated. I don't think that science supports that idea or ever even has. And that's the case that I'm making in the book. That Kamala Harris and that instinctive reaction she has actually represents old news, something that is soon to pass away as science reveals more about our universe.
Well, you know, the thing about it is people don't want to be challenged. I mean, this is part of the walking away from God. People don't want to be challenged. So they accept sort of the things about the expressions of faith that don't challenge anything. So, for example, Kamala making references to prayer. Oh, isn't that nice? And that's fine. But going to the Al Smith dinner is something that she decided she didn't want to do because she didn't want to offend any of her anti-Christian base because of the view, because of Catholic teaching on issues like abortion. So anything that challenges people to a certain understanding of the world, to a certain understanding of their rights and responsibilities, to a certain moral code, that's where you got to draw the line, and you got to throw those Christians out of your rally.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned Donald Trump's no C.S. Lewis, but the actual C.S. Lewis, who was C.S. Lewis, said that people are always fine with an amorphous universal figure, right? Everybody loves the midichlorians, you creating the Force and enabling the Jedi to tap into some source of power throughout the universe, which is basically what this mouthing off amounts to, what this lip service that people pay to religion amounts to. But then, says Lewis, a real God, a God active in the world, that we simply cannot abide, because that's something we have to factor into our lives and react to. And I think that this is something we have gotten really used to. We've gotten used to talking about God as an abstraction and not as a reality of the world. And that can work for a while. You can get away with that for a while. But eventually you start to make no sense at all, because without God, almost nothing makes sense. The universe doesn't make sense. Science doesn't make sense. Morality kind of becomes a mere game of will, or just whatever you want to make it. Men can become women. And you start to see ostensibly very smart people making extremely stupid arguments and saying things that we know don't hold together. And one of the things we're living through in this election, and more broadly, I think in our lifetimes, is the collapse of that idea that you can make sense of the world without really factoring in God as a major reality, even a central fact of your reasoning.
Yeah, all of a sudden, you got 600 men taking 900 medals away from girls, as that UN report documented, and what can you do about it? Yeah, it's really interesting, and that's why I point to that trans ad that Trump did, Kamala doing the interview with a man pretending to be a woman, where she commits to taxpayer-funded gender reassignment surgeries for prisoners. It's interesting to me that's the ad that has seemed to get the most play. It's generated the most controversy, and that speaks to I'm surmising, I think, something that is visceral. Like, this stuff is gone. I try to be respectful of everybody, but this stuff is so far over the edge. This has to stop. That's the sense I get. The reaction is.
Yeah, the manifest ridiculousness of it is just offensive to the sensibilities, not of anybody that's hateful. Nobody's sitting around rubbing their hands together, thinking, I want to steal rights from the glorious trans unicorns out there. We're just trying to live in the world as it actually is. And it's funny, that ad, I've heard a lot about that ad, that Trump ran to she's for they, them, Trump's for you.
Yeah.
And I had heard about it, but I actually just saw it on Sunday. I was watching the football game, and I saw that ad for the first time myself. And it was such a stark contrast with the other ad that ran during that game, which was the Kamala ad, that doesn't feature Kamala Harris at all. She comes on at the beginning and she says, I support this message. And then it's basically the movie phone guy doing a voiceover about how Trump is going to make Project 2025 happen and ban abortions nationwide and all this stuff that was kind of copy-pasted off of Facebook, some meme she saw. This campaign is really flailing. And it's flailing because Kamala Harris doesn't stand for anything. She's never had an original idea in her life. She's been elevated to this position on the basis of pure expediency, desperation after it became impossible to deny the reality of Biden's gradual senescence. It then became necessary to insist on another absurdity, which is that Kamala Harris is this joyful, brilliant, sharp prosecutor. And that, too, is obviously untrue. And so this party is just kind of at a loss because they keep demanding that we agree to things that are flatly false. And the men can become women thing is kind of the classic example of this. It's like the party demands that 2 + 2 should equal 5, and you have to say it. And if you don't say it, we'll persecute you, we'll hound you, we'll call you names. And I just think that is kind of falling apart from under them as we watch.
Well, also, too, I don't know what our campaign is doing. I mean, Trump won the news cycle this past weekend with the Al Smith dinner. Then he went and worked the McDonald's. Then he went to a football game. Then he went to a barber shop. She could be doing all those things, but for some reason, she had it was her birthday. Celebrate me some more. I turned 60, and she had a big celebrity party. But she's not relating to the average American.
Yeah, she had the wonder of Stevie, right? Stevie Wonder kind of singing her happy birthday song, which, I mean, no shade on Stevie Wonder. I love his music, but he's also getting up there, and it was not a great performance. You're right. She could be doing retail politics the way that Trump is, but there's one problem, which is he's really, really good at it, and she's really, really bad at it. And she's bad at it because she's not actually ever saying what's on her mind. She's sort of trying. She's so constructed to within an inch of her life that she can't speak spontaneously. She can't do all this stuff that Trump does, not just at McDonald's, but visiting the hurricane victims earlier on, which is something that the Biden administration and Harris, as part of that, is very uncomfortable kind of maneuvering around that disaster and just showing some sort of natural human feeling for it. Trump's in his element here. This is Trump's major strength. Whatever else you think of him, however you felt about his debate performance, if those are the places where his supporters start to get a little bit on edge, this is the place where he is just unparalleled in his skills. And I think it's because he likes people and he likes the American people, and he's just good at dealing with them for that reason.
Spencer Klavan, scholar, writer, podcaster, author of Light of the Mind, Light of the World, How New Science is Illuminating Ancient Truths About God. Light of the Mind, Light of the World, Spencer Klavan. Spencer, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer.